regularly.
That's after the BBC World Service News.
BBC News with David Halbert. Israel says its military has been added to a UN list of entities committing violations against children. Israel's UN envoy described the move as shameful. Its spokesman said the methodology was well established. He criticised Israel for leaking the news ahead of the list's presentation to the Security Council next week. William Anders, the American astronaut who took the famous Earthrise photo during the Apollo 8 moon mission in 1968, has been killed in a plane crash in Washington state. He was 90 years old. Brazil is to request the extradition from Argentina of more than 60 people accused of involvement in the attacks on government buildings after the far-right former president, Jair Bolsonaro, lost power last year. Many have moved to Argentina since the inauguration of its new libertarian leader. The United States Coast Guard has seized more than 2,000 kilos of cocaine worth over $63 million. It came in two separate interceptions of drugs smuggling boats in the Caribbean Sea north of Venezuela. The US Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas has acknowledged for the first time in his annual financial reports that he'd taken 2 luxury trips in 2019 paid for by a Republican donor. There have been calls for him to resign since the allegations were first made by a news site. The Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has been assaulted in the capital Copenhagen. The office said the man hit her in a square in the city centre. Witnesses say she was shoved hard on her shoulder. A report says 50,000 people have died in California over a decade because of pollution caused by wildfires. Researchers blame tiny particles released by the blazes. Britain's second televised election debate has brought more criticism of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak for leaving the D-Day commemorations early on Thursday. The representative from his Conservative Party, Penny Mordaunt, said the move was wrong, but stressed that Mr Sunak had apologised. BBC News.
You're back with side 2 of the Outlook mixtape with me, Mubin Azar, from the BBC World Service. Earlier this week, Emily Webb spoke to Owen Elliott QGL, the daughter of music icon Mama Cass Elliott. You might know her from the folk rock group The Mamas and Papas, who hit the big time in the 1960s. Their intricate harmonies stuck in the minds of listeners with songs like California Dreaming and Monday Monday. But everything ground to a halt after a solo show at the London Palladium. Cass died unexpectedly. She was just 32 years old, and she left behind a 7-year-old daughter called Owen. Since then, Owen has been getting to know her mother through interviews with her friends, colleagues, and of course, the music she left behind.
Well, my grandmother liked to go to Las Vegas. She would go to Las Vegas and she would leave me alone, and I would be alone with the record player and my grandmother's collection. And my grandmother had every record that her daughter ever made, because that's what moms do. And I got to experience that music really for the first time.
And you came across this one song that your grandmother heard of your mother's called Lady Love. Can you tell me about that song?
Lady Love is a song that was written by Delaney Bramlett of Dirty Bonnie and Friends fame. And he and my mom were friends, and he wrote a song for my mom to sing about me called Lady Love. And it's a really, really sweet song. And when I heard it the first time, there's actually an opening on the song. You know, my mom says,
I'd like to sing a song especially for my mom.
and I just lost it the first time I heard that. It was so sweet to hear, because I didn't have a lot of memories of what her voice sounded like. And what her voice sounded like talking about me was like gold.
It must have felt like weird as it was speaking to you for the time.
Yeah, but at the same time, it was also really familiar, and it gave me a good feeling. You know, I mean, I remembered what she sounded like. You know, there were other records that there was, for instance, her last record that she made for RCA
You can call me honey.
was a record called Don't Call Me Mama Anymore. And it was a record that she had recorded live at a nightclub in Chicago.
Don't call me mama anymore.
And it was all these songs that she wanted to sing, right? The stuff that really made her tick, if you will. And there's a lot of a lot of her speaking on that record because, as I said, it's a live record.
And welcome to Mr. Kelly.
And she talks about the songs when she's singing them.
And maybe perhaps you can pretend that you're in my living room. Of course, the drinks wouldn't be so watered.
And when I heard that record for the first time, I think that was probably the most poignant to me because hearing her voice, right? Hearing what she sounded like, it was just like I remembered.
Really hot up here, I have to tell you. Last night, when I came out for the second set, as an experiment, I taped a small piece of yeast to my stomach, and when I came off, I had Toll House cookies.
You know, and then into my life, into the whole invention of VCRs and recording, and all the technological advances that we've gotten to experience in the last 30 or 40 years. I've gotten to see all kinds of video of her on these talk shows, you know, on Mike Douglas, on Johnny Carson, on all these shows.
Everybody knows I'm Mama Cass.
Are you good looking?
Oh, yes. Is that proper to say? Sure. That seems too egotistical. Anyway, I love her a lot.
And every time I get to see that, and I get to hear her, it's wonderful because it reminds me of what she sounded like. It's like a little warm hug, you know?
That's what I really was learning about her mother. There was one thing she really wanted to know. Was she happy?
That's something I needed to know. I'm not sure why it was so important. Well, obviously it's important, but I guess I just needed to know what her state of mind was for the last, few weeks of her life. I wanted to make sure. It was important to me to make sure that she was happy. Not that I can do anything about it if she wasn't, but in some ways it just made me feel better.
What did you find out?
Well, I found out she was happy. She was having a great time. Those 2 weeks at the Palladium, it was the first time that she was Cass Elliot. She wasn't just Mama Cass. And I know that was really important to her. And I know that was an accomplishment. She wrote this letter to me that I found many years later. But it had been written in London. It's kind of a mystery how it actually came to the United States because it wasn't in an envelope with a stamp on it, but she had written a letter 2 days before she passed. And she had written it to me, and it's so sweet how she writes it because it's really obvious she's writing it to a child, and the way that she describes where she is and what she's doing, and that she's at the London Palladium, and it's a beautiful theater, and I'm doing 2 shows a day, and that means I have to wash my hair after the second show, and then I'm so tired, and then I go back and I go to sleep. So it's just this letter about, what she's doing, and that she misses me so much, and that she can't wait to come.
What's it like for you when you read that letter now?
Well, it definitely makes my heart swell. It's beautiful. And to really see how, she was writing it to me when I was a little girl. It just made me feel really good.
And that feeling you had that you had to share. And an example that I was thinking of is you got her reburied in Los Angeles. She'd been buried initially in Baltimore, and she was reburied by you and your grandmother in your family in Los Angeles. And the moment that people found out where her grave was, because initially it was just your place.
It was quiet for a while. And people didn't know she was there, but eventually people discovered that she was there. And it became a little bit uncomfortable for me for a while because I would go there and there would be flowers or there would be, stuff left at her grave. And that I started to be feeling a little bit invaded. I've since changed how I feel about that. But just coming to terms with it, takes time. And the interesting thing is that, every time I would go up there, I would be like, it's uncomfortable, I would never know really what to say. It's a cemetery. It's just not the most fun place to be, right? And I would always be a little bit, I would approach her grave and be like, hey, it just feel weird, I would never know what to say. And this last time that I was up there was, I guess, about a month ago, I think maybe a little bit longer. And I went up and I bought out some flowers, and I walked over to her grave, and I heard myself say, "Hi." And I thought, okay, that's weird. How come that felt so nonchalant? How come that felt so comfortable? I just had a weird. Somebody who I love, who I haven't seen in a really long time, you know? And I realized that I felt closer to her than I'd felt before.
That was Owen Elliott Hugel talking to Emily Webb. She's written a book. It's called My Mama Cass. And now, for a change of scene, we've picked out an episode from the Outlook archive. Picture a cold morning on August 26, 1988. Peruvian naval submarine called the Prococha was struck by a Japanese fishing boat. Within minutes, the 94-meter submarine began to sink, coming to rest on the ocean floor, 42 meters beneath the waves. Some crew escaped immediately after impact, but 22 sailors remained trapped inside. First Lieutenant Roger Katrina Alvarado soon realized he was the most senior officer on board, and that getting his fellow survivors out of the wreck safely is now his responsibility. He told Clayton Cohen what he did.
All that I was thinking about was how to save my crew, to save the lives of my crew who were now my responsibility.
Being the chief engineer, Roger was hypersensitive to how much air they were consuming, the possibility of toxic gases being produced, and the amount of pressure that was being asserted in the different chambers. Factors that would determine if they would live or die.
We went to the command room, retrieved emergency oxygen tanks, blocked off that room and gathered into only two areas, the battery room and the torpedo room. We had no fresh water, lights, or food.
That is when Roger started to do some arithmetic.
I started around 8:30 at night and came to my final numbers at about midnight. I calculated that the water had flooded to such a volume that it was impossible for us to somehow refloat the submarine.
As the rest of the crew tried to sleep and conserve oxygen, Roger took a pause from the maths equations and gathered with the other remaining officers, under the light of the only working flashlight, to weigh out their different options for rescue or escape.
I argued that at our depth, 42 meters, we could make a safe escape, but the others said no. They said that several years before, a sailor died during a training exercise at only 15 meters. They said that if I let the crew escape that way, that I was going to send them to their deaths. So I asked what our plan should be. Nothing. We need to wait for the Navy to rescue us. Let them use all of their resources.
Roger was reluctant to agree to the plan, knowing that time was not on their side. Approximately 6 hours had passed since the collision, and an eerie silence descended on the compact metal walls as most of the crew tried to sleep and keep calm. But that would soon be interrupted.
At midnight, we began to hear some sounds on the hull. Knock, knock, knock.
At first, Roger thought it was the sound of the submarine settling further on the sea floor. But the intervals were too regular.
So we began to hit the sides of the sub. Then we heard that iconic riff. We responded with the same. They did it again. And we responded. We exploded with joy. You see, boys, you see, I told you they would find us. I became overwhelmed with emotion. Lieutenant, you were right, the crew told me. They didn't abandon us. You see, now we need to wait just a little longer and remain calm.
Morale was now sky high, trapped 42 meters under the sea. Yet no real communication had been established with the divers, and the 22 sailors had no idea how long it would take for the Peruvian Navy to actually rescue them. Roger had initially calculated that they would have enough air for 48 hours, but within 6 they were already struggling to breathe.
That's when I decided to write a letter to the naval authorities. I first wrote out how many of us were trapped, that we didn't have water or food, and that we had a very limited air supply. I requested that they send the divers to come into the sub with extra dive tanks to assist the crew to the surface. I wrote that message at 1:10 a.m.
By that time, they had been on the ocean floor for 7 hours.
We put the message in the submarine's pressurized message tube and launched it to the surface. Within a few minutes, the divers outside began to bang on the hull in Morse code, informing us that they had received our message and that they were sending down a written response. That is how we developed a system of communication with the rescuers.
The message came down.
In their first message, they expressed their admiration for us, for our courage and spirit. They then said that they had requested help from the United States and that they were sending a piece of equipment called an extraction hood to rescue us. But I thought to myself, how long would it take to organize such an operation and how long would it take to get to Peru? Another message came down informing us that the Americans couldn't make it any earlier than the afternoon of the following day.
The urgency for help would take a dramatic turn to desperation 9 hours after the sub had been hit by the fishing boat.
I wanted to lie down for a moment and rest since I had not slept during the whole ordeal, when at 3:15 a.m. a man on watch woke me up and said that there were fireworks going off in the battery room. I jumped up and quickly went to the compartment where I see flashing and exploding. It was a fire, fire, fire! I could smell the burning and smoke. The battery room was contaminated. I told the man on watch not to tell him. It had to remain a secret so as not to induce panic among the rest of the crew.
The compartment was sealed, and with it, half of the remaining air supply. Roger peered through the porthole and watched as the fire slowly self-extinguished, meaning there was no more oxygen in that room, but surely toxic gases. The only space with precious air left was the torpedo.
I thought that the oxygen levels would last and carbon dioxide levels would remain low for at least 24 more hours. But that fire changed everything. At 6 a.m., I felt that I was once again struggling to breathe. We had to begin preparation for our escape.
Listless, agitated, and hyperventilating, the trapped crew of the Pacocha couldn't afford to wait for the Americans to arrive.
Prepare the escape hatch right now. That's when I started to lose my patience. The crew now had to truly understand the grave danger we were in. I couldn't lie to them. I couldn't just send them to their deaths, but they needed to be very aware that everything that they did now, from here on out, required a lot of concentration. It required a lot of diligence and care, and everything had to be done in a meticulous kind of way. Their lives were in their own hands.
15 and a half hours had passed since the collision, and Roger sent a new message to the surface.
This time they responded that I was allowed to act based on my own judgment and the circumstances inside the submarine. That they would support my decision. It was at that moment that I confronted the hardest physical test of my life, of trying not to suffocate. There was a moment when my heart stopped beating regularly.
The plan was to swim out of the escape hatch in small groups. Keep in mind, this was 42 meters under the water.
They opened the door. It was around 11 a.m. and sunlight came shining in. On that day, that specific day, and in that area where we sank, the sea was as clear as a swimming pool. It's never like that. It's always very murky and dark, with the light that came in through the escape hatch illuminated everything.
Ilumina a interiores.
That was Roger Catrino Alvarado. Definitely someone you'd want next to you in a sticky situation. He was speaking to Clayton Con in 2021. Roger's full story and all the other episodes we dropped in on today are available on the BBC Outlook homepage, or you can find Outlook on BBC Sounds. That's all for today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. From me, Mubin Azar, and the whole team, thanks for listening.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, and now witness history with me, Vicky Fong. I'm taking you back to 2008, when an Iraqi reporter hurled his shoes at the President of the United States. Just to warn you, this program includes descriptions of torture.
I felt I had a foot in this world and a foot in the other world. I felt I was definitely going to face the end of my life.
It's the 14th of December 2008, and Iraqi TV journalist Muntadar al-Zaidi is scared. He's just discovered the President of the United States, George Bush, is in Baghdad and will be giving a joint press conference with the Iraqi Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki.
I had been looking out for him, but I had almost given up the hope I would ever come across him.
As a correspondent for Al-Baghdadiya, an independent Iraqi television station, Muntadar has covered stories of bombings, house shellings, and the killing of Iraqi citizens by US soldiers. Today, he will finally put into action a dream he's had for many months. A protest to show President Bush exactly what he thinks of America's occupation of Iraq. The press conference is to be held in a room in al-Maliki's palace in Baghdad. Arriving there, Muntadar and the other Iraqi reporters are told the front section of chairs is reserved for the press pack travelling with the president.
This was the first humiliation. The second humiliation was when they told us that George Bush's personal protection team would not allow the president to come into the hall unless we were hand-searched fully. Naturally, I was angry at being searched by a foreigner in my own country. As he searched me from top to bottom, he stopped when he reached my shoes and thanked me. At that point, I looked at him, smiled, and said to myself, "Hey, you do not know this is the weapon I carry. Beware."
Muntadar moves to his chair and loosens his shoes, so he's wearing them like slippers. The press conference begins. White House footage shows the two leaders standing side by side behind lecterns and in front of a row of Iraqi and American flags. Bush is giving a speech about a new security pact between the United States and Iraq. As he ends the speech, he turns to al-Maliki and shakes his hand, then smiles and leans into the lectern.
George Bush was throwing a joke that he was hungry and that after the press conference he would go for dinner with Mr. Prime Minister. So I responded to that by saying to myself, "Your dinner is with me. My shoes are ready for you."
Muntadar knows this is the moment. He's standing about 12 feet, roughly 4 meters away.
It was not a normal feeling of fear. It was terror.
He slips off his shoe and bends down to pick it up.
I wanted to adhere to our Arab ethics of never hitting somebody in the back, which is treacherous deceit. So I faced him, and as I lifted my arm to throw the first shoe, I said, "Here's your goodbye kiss, you don."
The aim is perfect, and Bush has to duck to avoid the speeding shoe. The president barely has time to recover. 2 seconds later, Muntadar fires his other shoe and yells. This is from the widows, the orphans, and those who were killed in Iraq.
I was expecting to be killed at throwing the first shoe. This was all going in my mind in the fraction of a second.
Bush raises his hand to defend himself, but the missile misses its target. Hitting someone with a shoe is considered the supreme insult in Iraq. It means the target is even lower than the ground and dirty. For Muntadar, there is another reason.
The shoes were like any other men's shoes, regardless, of course, of the color or style. But my shoes had a most important feature, as they had been a witness with myself to the crimes of the occupation.
The moment the second projectile leaves his hand, Muntadar is pounced on.
And there I was, thrown upside down on the ground. Scores of Prime Minister Uri Maliki's personal security bugs surrounded me.
He's taken outside, and the cameras pan back to President Bush, who laughs off the attack.
Everybody calm down for a minute. First of all, if you want the facts, it's a size 10 shoe.
Muntadar is taken to the backyard by al-Maliki's guards, where he says he is abused and interrogated.
I was tortured using electricity and had tables and chairs broken on me. I ended up with a broken nose and teeth and a fractured foot. My whole body was covered in blood and my head literally was full of holes.
The press conference continues, and Bush is again asked about the attack.
It's like driving down the street and have people not gesturing with all 5 fingers. That's what happens in this free society. People trying to draw attention to themselves.
Muntadar is moved to a new location where he claims he suffers more torture. The Iraqi military denies mistreating him.
He's still in Iraqi custody, and while he hasn't been charged with anything yet, he could get 2 years behind bars for insulting a foreign leader.
His arrest sparks protests across Iraq.
1,500 protesters took to the streets, praising his actions and holding posters of President Bush ducking under one of the shoes.
I was kept in solitary confinement. The cell was hardly enough to contain my body. I was there for 3 months till I recovered from the traces of torture. While there, I could hear whispers from the officers and soldiers who were detaining me. I could hear their support for me. This was a good motivation for me to continue. It helped me avoid breaking down. I also used yoga to get out to the outer, larger world and empower myself and avoid collapsing. I felt it was worth it. I was not killed. I did not lose a hand or a foot, and I did not lose my head. So I was telling myself, continue. You sustained the least loss.
Muntadar's trial begins in February 2009. The same month, the new American president, Barack Obama, sets out a timetable for withdrawing US troops from Iraq.
3 years. That's how long the journalist who threw his shoes at President George Bush will spend in prison. The verdict and sentence came today following a short trial in Baghdad. 30-year-old Muntadar al-Zaidi had pleaded not guilty, saying his action was a natural response to the occupation. He shouted, "Long live Iraq," when the sentence was read.
Today, many people in Iraq treat Muntadar as a hero, but he struggles to find work. None of the TV outlets will employ him.
Day after day, those who used to question what I did come and apologize to me, saying, yes, he deserved it. We failed to look at things from your perspective. How can I regret this?
Muntadar al-Zaidi still lives in Iraq. He was speaking to me, Vicky Varncombe, for Witness History.
This is the BBC World Service with Jennifer Chevalier in conversation with multi-award-winning author Miriam Teagues.
The book we've chosen today, Women Talking. I want to start to ask you about your connection to the story.
I just remember the conservative Mennonite community that I grew up in, the oppression of women. I've been affected by it.
World Book Club at bbcworldservice.com/World Book Club or wherever you get your BBC podcasts. At bbcworldservice.com, people fixing the world with Myra Anubi.
We'll meet innovators in the UK, South Africa and Singapore who are making fashion more accessible with smart tech for sizing, hairstyling for the blind and the genius of hidden zips.
Next, it's Unexpected Elements. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
The show that brings you the science behind the news. This week, some unfriendly international balloon maneuvers have us wondering about the potential uses of these things. Rubber balloons, first invented by Michael Faraday, the father of electricity, may have been used by North Korea to drop litter over the border, but they also hold the promise of roadless, direct travel. So, where's my airship? Central to these schemes is a decent supply of lighter-than-air gas helium, but being lighter than air means we've got problems keeping Earth's limited reserves on this planet. Is a shortage a problem for more than the party balloon industry? Plus, why I'm smarter than my parents. Not my opinion, that's scientific fact. Find out.
Hello, I'm David Hart with the BBC News. William Anders, the American astronaut who took the famous Earthrise photo on Christmas Eve in 1968 during the Apollo 8 lunar mission, has been killed in a plane crash. He was 90 years old. Our North America correspondent Peter Bowes reports.
Retired Major General William Anders was piloting a small vintage plane when it crashed off the San Juan Islands in Washington state. Footage shows the aircraft nosediving into the ocean. Confirming his father's death, Greg Anders said the family was devastated. The iconic Earthrise photograph is one of the most memorable and inspirational images of Earth from space. It shows the planet rising above the horizon from the barren surface of the moon. William Anders later described it as his most significant contribution to the space program.
Israel says its military has been added to a UN list of entities committing violations against children. The country's UN envoy, Gilad Erdan, released a video of a phone call he'd had with a UN official informing him of the move ahead of the report's presentation to the Security Council next week. He described it as shameful. The UN Secretary-General spokesman, Stefan Dujarric, said the methodology behind the report was well established and transparent. He was highly critical of Mr. Erdan's response.
Earlier today, our Chief of Staff called the permanent representative of Israel, Gilad Erdan. The call was a courtesy afforded to countries that are newly listed on the annex of the report. It is done to give those countries a heads up and avoid leaks. Ambassador Erdan's video recording of that phone call and the partial release of that recording on Twitter is shocking and unacceptable, and frankly something I've never seen in my 24 years serving this organization.
Brazilian police said they will send extradition requests to Argentina next week for a number of fugitives who fled there after being accused of involvement in attacks against government buildings in Brasilia last year. An initial list shows 65 fugitives. The attacks were led by supporters of the former right-wing president, Jair Bolsonaro. The United States Coast Guard has seized more than 2,000 kilos of cocaine worth over $63 million in two separate interceptions of drug smuggling boats in the Caribbean Sea north of Venezuela. The BBC's Ian McWilliam has more detail.
The cocaine, neatly packed in dozens of black bags, has been offloaded from a US Coast Guard ship at Port Everglades in Florida. It has a street value of more than $63 million. It was seized in two separate incidents in the Caribbean, off the coast of Venezuela, near the Dutch Antilles. In one incident, the smuggler's boat was fired at when it veered towards a Dutch Caribbean Coast Guard vessel, also involved in the altercation. The boat burst into flames and sank, and three suspected smugglers jumped overboard. They haven't been found. The cocaine was recovered from the sunken boat.
Ian McWilliam, World News from the BBC. The President of the European Council has expressed his shock at an assault on the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, who was hit by a man that approached her in the capital Copenhagen. Charles Michel said in a social media post that he strongly condemned such an act of aggression. The Prime Minister's office said a man had hit her, while two witnesses said he'd shoved her hard on the shoulder. The US Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas has acknowledged for the first time in his annual financial reports that he'd taken two luxury trips in 2019 paid for by a Republican donor. The gifts were first reported by an investigative news site last year, leading to calls for him to resign. Annual reports also show the Liberal Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson received concert tickets worth nearly $4,000 from Beyonce. The Russian-appointed authorities in occupied southern Ukraine say at least 19 people were killed in a Ukrainian missile strike on a town in the Kherson region. The Russian government said the missile struck the shop in Sadar. The Russian authorities in the occupied region of Luhansk said the strike there killed 4 people in a residential block. The British Foreign Office says the Foreign Secretary David Cameron had falling victim to a hoax caller pretending to be the former Ukrainian president Petro Poroshenko. With more on the story, here's
The video call was brief, according to a Foreign Office spokesperson, and was preceded by an exchange of text messages. It clearly appeared to be Mr. Poroshenko, they say, but the Foreign Secretary is said to have become suspicious after the conversation that he wasn't talking to Ukraine's former president at all. The hoaxer asked for contact details of others, the Foreign Office says, and Lord Cameron then stopped responding. It says this took place in recent days, but won't say who it believes was behind the hoax, how they were able to contact the Foreign Secretary directly, or what was discussed.
BBC News.
At the weekend, I was hanging out with friends who know a lot about wildlife. Their home is a sanctuary for insects and birds. Nailed to the outside wall of their abode was a housing estate's worth of accommodation for bees, swallows, bats and swifts. And as swifts swooped above us, I heard just how alien their lives are to our own. These birds can eat, drink and even sleep in the air, climbing great heights and micro-napping as they glide. They live in the air for months at a time, as comfortably as we live on the ground. And what tempts them back to terra firma is nesting. My friends tried to help with that too, building an impressive fake gabled roof structure for the swifts to call home. And their reward for all the heavy lifting and the calloused hands, the swifts won't go near the thing. I'm Marnie Chesterton from the BBC World Service. This is Unexpected Elements. Soaring gracefully through this week's show, I'm joined by my global panel. In Bucharest, Romania, tech journalist Andrada Fiscatan. Welcome back, Andrada.
Hi, Marnie.
And in the frozen north of Canada, from Nunavut, welcome back, journalist Miral Jamal.
Hi, Marnie.
And it is still frozen, right?
It is still frozen. Very much so.
This is summer in northern Canada.
We're getting there, though.
So, I should explain to listeners, this is the show that takes a news story and it uses that as inspiration for a world of science. And we've started with the subject of aerial surprises, and staying with that, our attention was caught by something swooping out of the skies. But while my swifts were a welcome addition to the environment, these were less so. Take a listen to this.
North Korea appears to have made good on its threat to send rubbish over the border to South Korea.
This morning, the South Korean military shared photos of what looked like a plastic bag attached to big white balloons.
Part of the balloons were found in two border provinces containing waste paper and even postcards.
So this is North Korea saying that now you're going to see these balloons, they're going to cross into your border, you're going to experience how difficult it is to clean them up.
So this is the bizarre story of balloons appearing in South Korea, sent by North Korea, attached to plastic bags of waste. Now, both South and North Korea have been using balloons to drop leaflets over the border since, I think, the 1950s. And North Korea did recently threaten to retaliate, dropping South Korean border towns with waste North Korea claims was dropped over on its side. So, what science chats does this story inspire?
Have you ever been to the St. Paul's Cathedral in London?
I cycle past it all the time, but I have to say I'm too mean to go in it because you have to pay £25, which I think is a lot of money.
It is. Miral? Well, I have never been, and I suspect it will take me more than a few flights to get there at this point, so probably won't over the next bit either.
Why do you ask, Andrada? What went on there?
Well, in the early 18th century, some interesting experiments happened there, inside the cathedral. They were conducted by Isaac Newton and his assistants, and these experiments involved dropping balls of lead, of glass, and flasks of mercury from up high. And Newton wanted to know just how long it would take for these objects to fall, because he wanted to understand how air resistance affected their motion.
Now, I should say to people who've never seen St. Paul Naples Cathedral that it does have a big central dome and there's a gallery around the top. So presumably the scientists went up there with balls of glass and flasks of mercury and made a mess.
Yes, and they also had balloons. And since it was the early 18th century, the best available option for balloons was pig bladders.
Pig bladders?
You heard that? Yeah, you heard that right.
Physicists weren't the only ones finding a use for pig bladders, right?
That is correct. These were also used by football players. However, pig bladders are not that great for football because they are easy to puncture. So, luckily, a century later, in 1824, a rubber balloon was invented by the one and only Michael Faraday.
Faraday as in father of electricity Faraday?
Yeah, that's right, because he needed balloons for his experiments. Again, one day he got two round sheets of rubber, he put one on top of the other, he pressed the edges together and coated the inside with flour so the two sheets don't stick. And then he inflated the object. He described the balloon stretching and becoming transparent. A year after that, toy balloons, the ones we love, that were made of rubber, came to the market.
Well done to Faraday for two equally important contributions to civilization, electricity and balloons. Nobody can be uncheered with a balloon, said Piglet in unless you're in South Korea and there's a suspiciously stinky plastic bag attached to it. Now, if one big balloon can lift a trash bag, what else can you lift with a balloon? That's what the Unexpected Elements team have been using in this week's fact file.
Harry! Look at me! Listen to my voice! La 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 la!
Julia, would you stop wasting gas? This is serious.
Hold on. Do you really think you can get yourself to float using just balloons?
Of course, it's basic chemistry. If we assume that at room conditions, helium weighs 0.18 grams per litre and air weighs 1.29 grams per litre...
Yeah, the difference between the two is what a litre of helium should be able to lift. I know.
So if we take 0.18 from 1.29, that's...
1.11 grams.
Right, and say I weigh 70 kilograms, then I'll need...
just over 70,000 litres of helium.
And that is, I think, roughly 10,000 normal party balloons.
Wow, that is a lot of balloons.
And if we just tie the last one to my belt...
How do I not have anything better to do with my time?
Like that, then all we need to do is release the clamps from my shoes.
With pleasure. Here goes.
It works!
Wow, it actually did.
Although, Julia, I think I might be scared of heights.
How are you going to get back down?
What?
Harry! Harry!
And if anyone sees our producer Harry, please do send him to the same address you send your postcards to us. That's Unexpected Elements, BBC World Service, Cardiff, CF10 4GA in the UK. Or if you don't want to pay for the postage for him, you can just alert us. So that's unexpected@bbc.co.uk or WhatsApp us +44 330 678 3080. There's always something magical about balloon travel, and the more advanced versions, airships, have always struck me as a good idea. They're basically a way of getting yourself to fly around like Harry did, but probably slightly more comfortable. They're silent, they float without energy. All you need is a motor to steer you in the right direction, and you're not limited by roads or hindered by mountains and rivers. Gliding from A to B makes me feel like there's a real marketplace here. Why aren't the skies full of airships?
That's a great question, Marnie, and it was something that I was thinking too. Why aren't there more airships around? Because it would make things so much easier for Nunavut, where we have to ship up or fly up things like hand soap and clothing and a hairbrush sometimes. If airships don't use as much energy like a helicopter or an airplane to be in the air, and they're better for the environment, it would be good for us too.
So why haven't they happened? I feel like I've read about people starting airship companies, but I've never been in one, and that's still on the bucket list. But is that in the offing?
So it's interesting. It seems like there are others who see the potential in airships, and there is one promising company called Hybrid Air Vehicles in the UK that did a few years ago claim to have the largest flying aircraft in the world.
Does it look like the normal Zeppelin shape? Is it normal airship shape?
Not quite. So it was actually more like two of them that were joined together, and that was a bit unfortunate because from a certain angle they kind of look like a flying bum, or that's what they were nicknamed to be.
I remember the photos, and I have to say it's pretty accurate. If anyone wants to Google flying bum. You said what happened to the flying bum?
Yeah, so at the end of 2017, the flying bum, it broke free from its mooring, which resulted in an emergency deflation, and it never got rebuilt. But the company continues to have plans for building a manufacturing facility and reports taking orders from various companies around the world.
And I mean, you do see them occasionally in parades or over sports stadia, like during the Super Bowl, you get the TV blimps, but you don't really see that many of them about. Why is that? Are they unreliable or unsafe?
Well, they used to be. So the Hindenburg disaster in the late 1930s is an example of that. And the Hindenburg was from an era of hydrogen-filled rigid airships, and they used hydrogen because it offers the most lift, but also because of the time helium sources were far rarer. Also, heavier than air airplanes proved far more reliable and faster and less dependent on weather over time. Again, thinking about Nunavut, where the weather conditions aren't too great. But today, there's still a company that makes the Zeppelin NT out of Friedrichshafen in southern Germany, where the original Zeppelins were first developed.
Okay, so there is still hope that I might one day travel in an airship.
I think so, and I can see you have a great time, actually. I think you're one of those people who would enjoy being in an airship / flying bum.
And just to clarify, the difference between using helium, which is inert, and hydrogen, which is explosive, is quite an important distinction, right?
Yeah, and it's, I guess, one